"Intruders! The child is gone!" The scream tore through Caerleon Castle like a blade, shattering the midnight silence. Maerwynn dropped her scrubbing brush into the bucket of soapy water, her heart leaping to her throat. Outside the scullery windows, torches blazed to life across the courtyard as guards scrambled toward the eastern tower. She pressed against the cold stone wall, her golden hair escaping the confines of her tattered headscarf. At 17 winters, she had learned to make herself invisible within these ancient walls. A castle maid was nothing more than moving hands and lowered eyes, especially one who had arrived as a starving orphan 5 years prior. The Duke's stewards barely acknowledged her existence beyond barking orders about linens and fireplaces. "What's happening?" she whispered to Rowena, the plump kitchen woman who kneaded dough with flour-covered hands. "Lady Anwyn's gone missing," Rowena hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "And they say a thief was caught in the treasury. Now both have vanished." Maerwynn's thoughts flew immediately to the guard who stood sentry at the inner gates each morning. The tall, bearded man with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of mountains. Caelin. Unlike the other soldiers who jested and boasted, he remained silent, his gaze always distant, as though watching for something beyond the castle walls. For 3 months, she had passed him daily with her basket of linens, and for 3 months, she had felt her cheeks flush beneath his momentary glance. "The Duke commands every able man to the great hall," a herald's voice echoed through the servants' corridors. Without thinking, Maerwynn abandoned her scrubbing and slipped into the shadows of the passageway that connected to the main castle. Servants were not permitted in the great hall during council, but the tapestry behind the northern alcove concealed a narrow space where the masons had never properly sealed the wall. From there, she could see and hear everything. The Duke of Caerleon paced before his ornate chair, his crimson cloak billowing behind him like a bloodstain upon the stone floor. Candlelight flickered across his aging face, deepening the lines of fury that marked his features. "My daughter," he roared, "taken from her very bed. Who among you will bring her back to me?" Knights knelt in gleaming armor, hands upon sword hilts, each pledging fealty and promising the child's return. Maerwynn scanned the hall for Caelin, finding him standing apart from the others, his face half hidden beneath his helmet, his posture tense as a drawn bowstring. "My lord," called the chief steward, a thin man with eyes like a raven, "we must consider that this may be an act of revenge." The thief wore the colors of Dunlor. A hush fell over the assembly. Even Maerwynn, who knew little of politics, had heard whispers of Dunlor, a neighboring estate whose lord had been executed for treason a decade ago. His land seized, his family presumed dead. The Duke's face darkened. Impossible. The line of Dunlor is extinguished. Through the gap in the tapestry, Maerwynn saw Caelin's hand tighten around his sword hilt until his knuckles whitened. Something in his posture changed. A subtle straightening of his spine, a lifting of his chin. "Search the forest to the north," the Duke commanded. "The storm approaches. They cannot have gone far." As knights and soldiers filed out, Caelin remained motionless, his gaze fixed upon some distant point. When the hall emptied, he slipped away not toward the barracks, but toward the stables. Curiosity, and something deeper, something Maerwynn dared not name, propelled her from her hiding place. She followed at a distance, watching as he discarded his helmet and gathered supplies with practiced efficiency. Rope, flint, a small hunting bow. "You're going after them alone," she said, stepping from the shadows. He whirled, hand instinctively reaching for his dagger, then freezing when he recognized her. For the first time, she saw his face fully, the strong jaw beneath the untrimmed beard, the scar that curved like a half-moon from his temple to his neck, and eyes green as the summer forest. "Return to your duties, girl," he said, his voice low and rough from disuse. "I know these woods better than any knight," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I gathered herbs there before I served in the castle." His eyes narrowed, studying her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a servant girl with dirty hands and worn clothes, but as something more. "The castle guards won't find them," she continued. "They'll follow the main paths, but there are caves to the east where outlaws sometimes shelter." "How would you know such things?" he asked, suspicion edging his words. "My father was a forester before the fever took him." The lie came easily, better than the truth of a childhood spent scavenging and hiding from those who would harm an orphaned girl. Thunder rolled across the night sky, and rain began to patter against the stable roof. Caelin glanced toward the castle, then back to the small figure before him. Something in his expression shifted. A decision made. If you slow me down, I leave you behind, he said finally, throwing her a worn cloak. And if you speak of this to anyone, I won't, she promised, wrapping the too large garment around her shoulders. It smelled of pine and leather and something distinctly male. As they slipped through the postern gate into the howling storm, Maerwynn felt a thrill of fear and excitement. This man, this silent guard whose gaze had haunted her dreams, was more than he appeared. And for the first time in years, she was more than just a shadow upon the castle walls. Neither noticed the hooded figure watching from the battlements, nor heard the whisper that followed them into the darkness. So the raven returns to his nest at last. The forest closed around them like a fist, branches lashing in the wind. Rain sliced through the canopy, transforming the woodland floor into treacherous mud that pulled at their boots with each step. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Caelin's face in harsh relief as he forged ahead, one hand on his sword hilt, the other holding a torch that sputtered and fought against the downpour. We should have waited until morning, he growled, catching Maerwynn as she slipped on a moss-covered stone. By morning they could be leagues away, she replied, steadying herself against a tree trunk. The caves are just beyond the old oak grove. For 2 hours they trudged through the tempest, the castle disappearing behind them. Maerwynn felt a strange freedom despite the danger. Beyond the castle walls, she was not just a servant girl, but a guide, a necessary companion. Here, Caelin could not dismiss her as he might in the torchlit corridors, where rank and station dictated every interaction. How does a castle maid know these woods so well? He asked during a brief respite beneath a massive elm. Maerwynn hesitated. Before the Duke's men found me, I lived as I could. Sometimes that meant knowing where to hide. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding of survival. And why would a girl who knows where to hide choose the confines of castle service? Winter is crueler than any master, she answered simply. And yours is not the only past better left unspoken. His face hardened, and he turned away, scanning the darkness. We move on. Stay close. The rain eased as they approached a ridge of limestone that rose like pale fingers from the forest floor. Caelin extinguished the torch, and they proceeded by the intermittent flashes of lightning. Maerwynn led them to a narrow crevice, barely visible among the tumble of boulders. There, she whispered, pointing. Large enough for a man to pass if he knows it's there. Caelin drew his sword, the steel catching the blue-white flash of lightning. Wait here. I did not come this far to wait in the rain, she countered, pulling a small knife from her belt, a kitchen blade she had taken from the scullery. Its edge was keen from years of chopping vegetables, if nothing else. He looked as though he might argue, then nodded once, a grudging acceptance. Behind me then, and if I tell you to run, you run. Back to the castle, not deeper into danger. They squeezed through the crevice, entering a passage that twisted downward into darkness. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp stone and smoke. Someone had lit a fire within. Caelin moved with the silent precision of a predator, each step placed with care, his body tense and ready. The passage widened into a cavern where a small fire cast flickering shadows against walls decorated with ancient paintings, crude figures of men and beasts from times long forgotten. 3 men huddled around the flames, their faces hard in the firelight. In the corner, a small figure lay curled upon a cloak, Lady Anwyn, her fair hair unmistakable even in the gloom. She sleeps finely, one man said, his voice echoing in the chamber. The little brat nearly took my eye out with her kicking. She'll fetch a pretty ransom, though, another replied, counting coins that glittered in his palm. This and the Duke's gold will set us for life in the northern kingdoms. If we reach them, said the third, the largest of the group, a scarred brute with a battle axe propped against the wall beside him. The Duke's men will be scouring every road by now. They'll never think to look here. The first laughed. These caves haven't been used since the old Lord of Dunlor used them to hide those fleeing the Duke's justice. Caelin's voice rang out as he stepped into the firelight, sword gleaming. The men leapt to their feet, weapons drawn, but Caelin moved with a speed and grace that belied his size. His blade flashed once, twice, and the first man fell clutching a gash across his chest. The second lunged with a dagger, only to meet Caelin's fist against his temple, crumpling to the stone floor. The third, the scarred giant, swung his axe in a wide arc that would have cleaved a lesser man in two. Caelin dodged, but the weapon's edge caught his shoulder, tearing through leather and flesh. He staggered, blood darkening his tunic. Maerwynn watched in horror as the brute raised his axe for a killing blow. Without thinking, she darted forward and plunged her kitchen knife into the man's thigh. He roared in pain, turning his fury toward her. "Peasant bitch," he snarled, backhanding her with such force that she slammed against the cave wall, stars bursting behind her eyes. Through blurred vision, she saw Caelin rise like vengeance itself. His movements were no longer those of a common soldier, but carried the precision and deadly grace of one trained in the highest martial arts, the kind reserved for nobility. His sword sang through the air, finding the gap between the brute's ribs with unerring accuracy. As the last attacker fell, silence reclaimed the cavern, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and Caelin's labored breathing. Maerwynn pushed herself upright, wincing at the pain in her back and the taste of blood in her mouth. Caelin knelt beside Lady Anwyn, gently brushing hair from her face. The child stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, her voice small and afraid. "No, my lady," he replied, his gruffness softening. "I am just a soldier from your father's castle." "You're bleeding," Maerwynn said, approaching with torn strips of her underskirt. "Let me bind your wound." He tensed as her fingers brushed his skin, but allowed her to clean and dress the gash. As she worked, she noticed the quality of his tunic beneath the guard's uniform, finely woven wool, the kind no common soldier could afford. And there, partially revealed by the torn fabric, was a pendant bearing an unfamiliar crest, a raven in flight. "You fight like a knight," she murmured, tying off the bandage. "Not a guardsman." His eyes met hers, green and fathomless as a forest pool. For a moment, something like trust, or perhaps mere exhaustion, lowered his guard. "There was a time when I was more than I am now," he said quietly. "As were you, I think." Before she could respond, voices echoed from the passage. Torchlight approached, accompanied by the clank of armor and the bark of orders. "The Duke's men," Caelin said, rising stiffly. "Sir Osric," Lady Anwyn cried, running toward the elderly knight who appeared first through the entrance, his weathered face lined with relief. Behind him came a dozen guards, swords drawn. Their eyes widened at the scene. 3 fallen outlaws, a wounded guardsman, and a blood-spattered kitchen maid standing among them. "What manner of guard travels alone with a servant girl?" demanded Lord Wulfric, the Duke's master-at-arms, his lip curling in disdain as he surveyed Maerwynn's torn dress and bruised face. "One who found your quarry while you blundered through the forest," Caelin replied, his voice cold. "Mind your tongue, commoner," Wulfric spat. "You forget your place." Sir Osric, however, was staring at Caelin with narrowed eyes, his gaze fixed on the half-concealed pendant. "That symbol," he murmured. "I have not seen it in many years." Caelin's hand moved to cover the raven crest, but too late. The old knight's expression shifted from suspicion to astonishment. "By all the saints," Osric whispered. "It cannot be." Dawn broke over Caerleon Castle, painting its gray stones with pale gold light. The great hall buzzed with whispers as nobles and servants alike crowded against the walls, straining to glimpse the unfolding drama at its center. The Duke sat upon his carved oak chair, knuckles white against the armrests, his face a mask of controlled fury. Before him stood Caelin, divested of his guardsman's cloak, his wound freshly bandaged, but his posture unbowed. Beside him, Maerwynn kept her eyes lowered, acutely aware of her place, or lack thereof, in such company. Her rough-spun dress, still stained with cave mud and blood, stood in stark contrast to the silks and velvets surrounding her. Lady Anwyn sat beside her father, small fingers clutching a wooden doll, her eyes darting between the Duke and her rescuers. "Explain yourself," the Duke commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Sir Osric makes a most extraordinary claim." Caelin remained silent, his face impassive. "He suggests," the Duke continued, rising to his feet, "that you are Caelin of Dunlor, son of a traitor, heir to a disgraced name, a man who should, by all accounts, be 10 years dead." The hall erupted in gasps and exclamations. Maerwynn's heart hammered in her chest. Dunlor, the neighboring estate whose lord had been executed for treason. If Caelin was truly its heir. "Is this true?" the Duke demanded. "Remove your shirt. Show us the birthmark that all of Edric's line bear." For a moment, Maerwynn thought Caelin would refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, he unlaced his tunic and pulled it aside, revealing a muscled shoulder marked with a crescent shape, like the moon she had glimpsed in fragments through scullery windows. "It is him," breathed an elderly noblewoman. Caelin of Dunlor, traitor's blood, hissed Lord Wulfric, hand moving to his sword hilt. I am Caelin, Caelin, finally spoke, his voice resonating through the hall. Son of Edric, rightful lord of Dunlor, I have served in your guard these past months, your grace, though you did not know it. To what purpose? The Duke demanded. Revenge? Assassination? To understand, Caelin replied simply. To learn if the man who condemned my father to death without trial was himself just or corrupt. The Duke's face flushed dark with rage. Your father conspired with our enemies. He would have opened our borders to the northern barbarians. My father, Caelin said, each word measured, sought peace when you wanted war. The northerners were starving after 3 years of failed harvests. He offered grain, not conquest. Lies! The Duke's fist crashed against the arm of his chair. Guards, seize this man. He shall share his father's fate. Armored men moved forward, but Sir Osric stepped between them and Caelin, his ancient sword drawn. I was there, the old knight said, his voice quavering but firm. I was there when Edric of Dunlor rode to the northern territories with wagons of grain, while our own people had full bellies. I was there when the barbarian chieftain wept at his generosity and pledged peace. And I was there, his voice broke, when you, my Lord Duke, twisted those actions into treason because you had already promised the northern lands to your second son. Shocked silence fell over the assembly. Even the guards hesitated, uncertain. This is outrageous, the Duke spluttered. You overstep, Osric. Your years of service do not grant you license to speak truth? Interrupted a new voice. All eyes turned to Lady Maerwynn, who had risen from her seat, the wooden doll forgotten. Father, the child said with startling clarity, this man saved me when your knights could not. The bad men said they were paid by someone in the castle to take me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Duke paled. Child, you misunderstood, he began. I didn't, she insisted. They said a man with a ring like yours paid them gold to take me away. Lord Wulfric stepped forward. The girl is confused, frightened by her ordeal. Clearly, the traitor's son has poisoned her mind with, Enough! Maerwynn's voice rang out, surprising even herself. She stepped forward, ignoring the scandalized looks from the nobility. Forgive my boldness, your grace, but I was there. I heard the kidnappers speaking of ransoms in northern kingdoms. Why would they flee north unless someone assured them safe passage? The Duke's eyes narrowed dangerously. And who are you to speak in my hall, servant girl? I am no one, she acknowledged, dropping into a belated curtsy. But I have ears to hear and eyes to see, and I saw how Lord Caelin fought to save your daughter, while others merely searched where it was comfortable to look. Lord Wulfric's face contorted with rage. Insolent wench, you forget your place. His hand lashed out, striking Maerwynn across the face with such force that she staggered. In an instant, Caelin had Wulfric by the throat, lifting the armored man as though he weighed nothing. Touch her again, he growled, and I will end you where you stand. Guards surged forward, but stopped at the Duke's raised hand. The ruler of Caerleon studied the tableau before him, the servant girl with her reddened cheek, the unmasked heir of Dunlor defending her, his most trusted advisor choking in the grip of a man he had ordered executed. Release him, Caelin, the Duke said quietly. After a moment's hesitation, Caelin complied, shoving Wulfric away with contempt. The Duke descended from his dais, approaching Lady Maerwynn. He knelt before his daughter, his ornate robes pooling around him. Tell me again, child, what exactly did the men say? They said the man with the ruby ring paid them, she repeated, pointing to Wulfric's hand, where indeed a large ruby gleamed. They said after they got the ransom, they would go north where he promised them protection. All eyes turned to Wulfric, whose face had drained of color. My Lord Duke, he stammered. The girl is confused. I have served you faithfully for 15 years. Search him, the Duke commanded. 2 guards moved to obey, and from Wulfric's tunic they withdrew a leather pouch. Inside were documents bearing northern seals and a map with marked routes through Dunlor lands. Traitor, the Duke whispered, his voice hollow with betrayal. You who counseled me to execute Edric of Dunlor for the very crime you yourself committed. Your grace, I can explain. Take him to the dungeons, the Duke ordered, rising to his feet. We shall determine his fate at proper trial, the trial that Edric of Dunlor never received. As Wulfric was dragged away, cursing and struggling, the Duke turned to Caelin. For a long moment, The two men regarded each other, the aging ruler and the son of the man he had wrongfully condemned. 10 years cannot be undone, the Duke said finally, nor can a father be returned to life. But Dunlor has stood empty too long. Its people deserve their lord. Murmurs of astonishment swept through the hall. Caelin stood motionless, his face unreadable. You would restore my lands? My title? Justice demands it, the Duke replied, though it comes far too late. Caelin's gaze flickered to Maerwynn, who watched him with wide eyes, a hand still pressed to her stinging cheek. And what of those who helped expose this treachery? What justice is there for a servant girl who risked her life when knights would not? The Duke glanced at Maerwynn, as though truly seeing her for the first time. Her tangled golden hair, her straight spine despite the circumstances, the intelligence in her eyes. What would you have me do, Lord Caelin? He asked, emphasizing the title with a slight nod. Recognize her courage, Caelin answered, as you have finally recognized the truth. Something shifted in the Duke's weathered face, perhaps respect, perhaps simply the wisdom of age recognizing the foolishness of pride. So be it, he declared. The maid Maerwynn shall be raised to the position of lady's companion to my daughter, who clearly trusts her judgment. He glanced at Anwyn, who beamed. She shall receive quarters befitting her new station and education suitable for court life. Maerwynn swayed slightly, disbelief washing over her. Lady's companion, a position normally reserved for gentlewomen of minor nobility, from scrubbing floors to silken chambers in a single morning. You are most generous, Your Grace, she managed, dropping into her deepest curtsy. Not generous, the Duke corrected, merely just, though belatedly so. He turned back to Caelin. As for you, my Lord of Dunlor, rooms will be prepared for your immediate use. When you are healed, we shall discuss the formal restoration of your lands and title. With that, the Duke swept from the hall, Lady Anwyn skipping at his side. The gathered nobility dispersed in clusters of excited whispers, many casting curious glances at the newly revealed lord and the servant girl who stood beside him. When they were relatively alone, Maerwynn looked up at Caelin, searching his face. Why did you not tell me who you were? Would you have believed a disgraced lord hid as a common guard? He asked, his voice low. Perhaps not, she admitted. But I might have understood why a guard looked at a kitchen maid as though she were worth seeing. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. You were always worth seeing, Maerwynn. Title or no title. As sunlight streamed through the high windows of the great hall, turning dust motes to gold, Maerwynn realized that for the first time in her life, she was, indeed, truly seen. A fortnight passed like a dream for Maerwynn. Her calloused hands, once raw from lye soap and scrubbing brushes, now turned the pages of illuminated manuscripts under the tutelage of Brother Aldwyn, the castle's scholarly monk. Her nights were spent in a small but comfortable chamber adjoining Lady Anwyn's quarters, on a feather mattress that still felt too soft after years of sleeping on straw pallets. The transformation extended beyond her accommodations. Gone were the rough-spun dresses and tattered headscarves, replaced by simple but well-made gowns of soft wool in muted blues and greens. Her golden hair, finally free of kitchen grease and ash, fell in waves past her shoulders, restrained only by a modest silver circlet, a gift from Lady Anwyn, who delighted in her new companion's metamorphosis. Yet despite these outward changes, Maerwynn felt adrift. The other ladies in waiting, daughters of minor nobility, regarded her with thinly veiled disdain. The servants who had once been her companions now averted their eyes in her presence, neither friend nor equal. She belonged nowhere, and to no one, except, perhaps, to him. Caelin of Dunlor had retreated from public view since the dramatic revelations in the Great Hall. Rumors abounded that he was preparing to reclaim his ancestral lands, that he had refused the Duke's offer, that he had already left Caerleon in the night. Maerwynn heard all these whispers, but had no way to verify their truth. Her new position kept her confined to the inner bailey, while Caelin's quarters were in the opposite wing. On this particular evening, as autumn winds rattled the shutters, Maerwynn sat beside Lady Anwyn's bed, recounting tales of forest spirits and brave woodcutters until the child's eyes fluttered closed. Gently tucking the blankets around the sleeping form, she rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the torchlit courtyard below. A knock at the chamber door startled her from her reverie. "Enter," she called softly, expecting perhaps a servant with fresh water or one of the other companions coming to relieve her watch. Instead, Sir Osric's weathered face appeared in the doorway. The old knight bowed slightly, his movements stiff with age. "Lady Maerwynn," he said, the title still strange to her ears. "Your presence is requested in the south garden." "At this hour?" she asked, glancing toward the darkened window. "By whom?" A smile creased the knight's face. "By one who waited 10 years for justice. Surely you can spare him a few moments of your time." Her heart quickened. "Lord Caelin?" Osric merely nodded, holding the door open. "I shall watch over the child. Go." The south garden lay beyond the kitchen yards, a quiet sanctuary rarely visited after sundown. Maerwynn wrapped a cloak around her shoulders and made her way through torchlit corridors, nodding to guards who now saluted her passing. How strange, this new deference, when just weeks ago she had been invisible to their eyes. The garden gate stood ajar, a single lantern casting a pool of amber light upon the stone bench beyond. And there, silhouetted against the night sky, stood Caelin of Dunlor. Gone was the guardsman's uniform, replaced by attire befitting his station, a tunic of deep green velvet, trimmed with silver thread, and a cloak lined with fur against the autumn chill. His beard had been trimmed, his hair pulled back with a simple leather thong, but his eyes, when he turned to her, were unchanged, green as forest shadows, watchful and intent. "You came," he said, as though he had expected otherwise. "Sir Osric can be quite persuasive," she replied, stepping into the lantern light, "though I admit I was curious. You've been absent these past weeks. Negotiations with the Duke have been complex." He gestured to the bench. "Please." She sat, arranging her skirts with care, another new habit from her lessons in deportment. Caelin remained standing, his gaze fixed on the stars emerging above. "I leave tomorrow," he said abruptly. "For Dunlor." Something cold settled in her chest. "I see. To reclaim your lands? To assess what remains of them? 10 years of neglect have not been kind by all accounts." Silence stretched between them, filled with the rustle of leaves and distant calls of the night watch. Maerwynn studied his profile, memorizing the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. "I wish you safe travels, my lord," she said finally, the formality a shield against the sudden ache in her throat. He turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the shifting lantern light. "I would have you come with me." The words hung in the night air. Maerwynn's breath caught. "To Dunlor? As what?" The question escaped before she could temper it with courtesy. "As whatever you wish to be," he answered, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. "Companion, advisor, friend." He hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps, in time, something more." Heat bloomed in her cheeks. "My lord, Caelin," he corrected. "You've never called me by my true name." "Caelin," she whispered, testing the shape of it on her tongue. "I have a position here now. Security. Lady Anwyn depends on me. And I need you more," he said with unexpected frankness. "You saw me when I was nothing. You risked your life beside mine when others would not. Dunlor needs rebuilding. Its fields, its villages, its hope. I cannot do it alone." She looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity in his gaze. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you survived alone when others would have perished. I know you navigate court politics with the same determination you showed in those caves. I know your heart is kind, but not weak." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "The Duke has offered a substantial dowry to any noble family willing to provide a bride for the restored Lord of Dunlor, a final gesture of restitution for my father's wrongful execution." Maerwynn pulled her hand away, stung. "So I am to be a political arrangement? A convenient solution to the Duke's guilty conscience?" "No," Caelin said sharply. "I refused his offer. I will not have a bride who comes to me out of obligation or ambition." His voice softened. "If you come to Dunlor, it will be by your choice alone, not by the Duke's command or coin." The night breeze carried the scent of late roses and wood smoke, reminding Maerwynn of the world beyond castle walls, a world she had once navigated alone before scrubbing brushes in castle kitchens. "Dunlor is in ruins, you said," she murmured. "What life could I have there?" "A difficult one at first," he admitted, "but an honest one. We would rebuild together, the keep, the villages, everything. And if I refuse?" His smile was tinged with sadness. "Then I wish you happiness in your new position, Lady Maerwynn. You have earned it." A rustle of movement behind them interrupted the moment. Both turned to see Lady Maerwynn standing at the garden entrance, her nightgown billowing around her small form, Sir Osric hovering anxiously behind. "Forgive me, my lord, my lady," the knight said, bowing. "She woke and insisted on finding you." Maerwynn approached, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Are you leaving us, Lord Caelin?" she asked, her child's voice piercing in its directness. Caelin knelt again, this time before the Duke's daughter. "Yes, little one. I must return to my own lands." "And you're taking Maerwynn with you," the child stated with absolute certainty. Maerwynn felt heat rise to her face. "Your Grace, I haven't decided." "But you must go," Maerwynn insisted, taking both their hands in her small ones. "He looks at you the way the prince looks at the maiden in my storybooks." Sir Osric coughed discreetly, hiding what might have been laughter behind his hand. Caelin's ears reddened visibly even in the dim light. "Stories are not always like real life, my lady," Maerwynn said gently. "But sometimes they are," the child countered with the unassailable logic of youth. "And father says we owe Lord Caelin a great debt, so if he wants you to go with him, you should." "It isn't that simple." "Why not?" Maerwynn demanded. "Don't you like him?" The directness of the question left Maerwynn speechless. She glanced at Caelin, whose eyes held a question of their own. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I do like him." "Then you should go," Maerwynn declared, as though settling a minor dispute over toys. "I shall miss you terribly, but father can find me another companion." "Out of the mouths of babes," Sir Osric murmured, amusement evident in his tone. Caelin stood, maintaining a dignity that Maerwynn envied at that moment. "Lady Maerwynn, the choice must be Maerwynn's alone. It is not a small thing I ask of her, but it is a great adventure," the child insisted. Like in the stories, Maerwynn looked between them, the weathered knight, the solemn lord, the precocious child, and felt laughter bubble up unexpectedly in her chest. How absurd it all was. 2 months ago, she had been scrubbing pots in the scullery, invisible and unremarkable. Now a lord awaited her decision, and a duke's daughter dispensed romantic advice by moonlight. "Perhaps," she said, her laughter subsiding into a smile, "it is time for me to write my own story." She rose, smoothing her skirts, and faced Caelin directly. "Dunlor sounds cold and drafty and impossibly difficult," she said, "but I have endured worse for far less worthy causes." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Then you will come?" "On one condition," she said, summoning courage from some hidden reserve. "I will not come as your servant, or as a lady-in-waiting, or as any position that places me below you. If I am to help rebuild Dunlor, I do so as your equal in the endeavor." For a moment he seemed taken aback by her boldness. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the first true smile she had ever seen from him, transforming his solemn features with unexpected warmth. "My equal," he agreed, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth cascading through her. "Nothing less." Lady Maerwynn clapped her hands in delight. "Just like in the stories." Sir Osric bowed deeply to them both. "My lord, my lady, may I be the first to wish you both happiness and Dunlor its restoration." As the stars wheeled overhead and autumn leaves danced around them in the garden, Maerwynn realized that perhaps some stories, improbable as they might seem, could indeed come true. Winter descended upon Dunlor like a sleeping beast, blanketing the rolling hills and skeletal forests in pristine white. Smoke curled from the repaired chimneys of the great hall, where once rain had fallen freely through a collapsed roof. In the courtyard, stonemasons chipped and hammered from dawn until dusk, rebuilding walls that had crumbled under a decade of neglect and deliberate ruin. 3 months had passed since Maerwynn had first glimpsed Dunlor from the crest of the northern road, a broken shell of a once proud estate, its fields overgrown, its outbuildings collapsed, its great hall open to the elements. She had stood beside Caelin as he surveyed his birthright, watching his face harden with grief and determination in equal measure. "We begin tomorrow," he had said simply, and she had nodded, already cataloging in her mind what must be done first. Shelter, food, warmth, the practical concerns that had kept her alive during her own years of hardship. Now, as midwinter approached, Dunlor stirred with new life. The village that had once served the estate had dwindled to a handful of families, suspicious at first of their returned lord and his strange companion, neither servant nor lady by all appearances. But necessity forged unlikely alliances. When Maerwynn organized the harvesting of wild apples from the untended orchard, sharing the bounty equally among all who helped, something shifted in the villagers' demeanor. When Caelin himself labored alongside the men to repair the mill before the first snow, more families returned from the scattered corners where they had fled after his father's execution. By the first frost, Dunlor boasted 40 households, a functioning mill, and fields cleared for spring planting. On this particular evening, as the year's shortest day approached, Maerwynn stood at the window of the solar, the one room in the keep that had been fully restored to its former comfort, with tapestries to block drafts and a hearth large enough to ward off the bitter cold. Below, in the hall, preparations for the midwinter feast were underway. It would be modest compared to the celebrations at Caerleon, but significant nonetheless. The first such gathering at Dunlor in a decade. "Are you certain I shouldn't help in the kitchens?" she asked as Caelin entered, brushing snow from his cloak. Elva seems overwhelmed. He smiled, the expression now coming more easily to him than it had months ago. The cook would be mortified if the Lady of Dunlor were found elbow-deep in bread dough on feast day. "I'm not the Lady of Dunlor," she reminded him, though the denial had become more habit than conviction. "Not yet. Not formally. A technicality only," he replied, crossing to warm his hands at the fire. "Every person on this estate looks to you as such." It was true, though still strange to consider. In the absence of formal title, Maerwynn had simply done what needed doing, organizing the women to weave new linens, establishing a system for fair distribution of supplies, even teaching the rudiments of reading to the village children 3 afternoons each week. Authority had come not from pronouncement, but from action. "The messenger returned from Caerleon," Caelin said, removing a sealed parchment from his tunic. "The Duke has responded to our invitation." Maerwynn tensed slightly. Their departure from Caerleon had been cordial but cool, the Duke's restitution tempered by lingering pride and decades of entrenched prejudice against the Dunlor name. The invitation to the midwinter feast had been Caelin's idea, a gesture of reconciliation for the sake of both estates. "And," she prompted when he made no move to break the seal. He handed her the parchment. "You should read it. You've as much stake in this as I." With careful fingers, she broke the wax seal bearing the Duke's crest. The message within was brief but clear. "Lord Caelin of Dunlor, your invitation is received with gratitude. Age and weather prevent my personal attendance, but my daughter, Lady Maerwynn, will represent Caerleon in my stead, accompanied by Sir Osric and a suitable retinue. They depart 3 days hence. Furthermore, let it be known that upon the occasion of your formal investiture as Lord of Dunlor, scheduled for the spring equinox, I shall recognize any union you have formed or intend to form with the Lady Maerwynn, formerly of my household. Her dowry, as discussed, shall be transferred upon your mutual pledge. Justice comes late, but I pray it comes completely. Godspeed, Eldred, Duke of Caerleon." Maerwynn read the words twice, her hands trembling slightly. "Maerwynn is coming," she said, focusing first on the simpler news. "And Sir Osric." "Yes." Caelin watched her carefully. "But that's not what has you shaking." She met his gaze. "A dowry. He still insists on providing a dowry as though purchasing forgiveness." Caelin took the parchment gently from her hands. "Or honoring a promise. The Duke is a proud man, but not without conscience. This is his way of making amends without surrendering his dignity." "And what of my dignity?" she asked, moving to the window again. "Am I still a transaction to seal a political alliance?" He followed, his reflection appearing beside hers in the frosted glass. "You know you are far more than that to me." Outside, villagers carried torches through the growing darkness, preparing for the ceremonial lighting of the midwinter fire in the center of the settlement. Their voices carried faintly through the glass, a distant chorus of community that Maerwynn had never known in her years of solitary survival. 3 months we've worked side by side," she said softly, "rebuilding walls, replanting fields, restoring what was broken. Yet we have not spoken of what lies between us. I made a promise in that garden," he reminded her, "that you would come as my equal, not my subordinate. I've waited for you to decide what you wish to be to Dunlor, to me." She turned to face him, studying the man who had once been a silent guard at a castle gate. The hardships of restoring Dunlor had carved new lines around his eyes, yet softened something in his bearing. He looked more like a lord now than he had in the fine velvet tunic at Caerleon, not because of any finery, but because of the quiet authority that came from leading by example. What I wish to be, she echoed, a smile tugging at her lips. Do you know, when I was a girl of 7 or 8 before the fever took my parents, I once told my mother I would marry a lord and live in a castle. And here you are, he said, returning her smile. Though I fear Dunlor falls somewhat short of the castle of your childhood dreams. On the contrary, she said, stepping closer to him, it exceeds them. For what child dreams of rebuilding, of creating something from ruins? That is an adult's dream, and all the more precious for it. His hands, rough from labor yet gentle, came to rest at her waist. Then tell me, Maerwynn, who is no longer a castle maid, no longer invisible, what do you wish to be in this place we are building together? She placed her palms against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath layers of wool and linen. Your wife, she said simply. Not because the Duke commands it, not because Dunlor needs a lady, but because I love the man who sees me truly. The word hung between them, new and fragile and powerful. In 3 months of shared work and purpose they had built trust, respect, even friendship, but neither had spoken of love. Caelin drew a sharp breath, his eyes darkening. Say it again, he whispered. I love you, she repeated, stronger now. Not Lord Caelin of Dunlor, though I respect him greatly. I love Caelin, the silent guard who noticed a kitchen maid when no one else did. He pulled her closer, one hand rising to cradle her face. And I have loved you since you stood in that storm-lashed forest, refusing to be left behind. My brave, stubborn, magnificent Maerwynn. When his lips met hers, it felt like completion. Not the end of a journey, but the joining of 2 paths into one stronger whole. His kiss was warm against the winter chill, a promise of spring and renewal, and life continuing despite all that had been lost. A knock at the door reluctantly separated them. Elva, the cook, entered with a cursory bow, her capable hands dusted with flour. Begging your pardon, my lord, my lady, but the villagers are assembled for the lighting ceremony. They await you both. Caelin nodded. We'll be down directly. When Elva had gone, he turned back to Maerwynn, offering his arm with formal courtesy that didn't quite mask the light in his eyes. Shall we go and light the darkness, my lady of Dunlor? She took his arm, her smile bright as the torches below. We shall, my lord, and tomorrow we prepare for our guests. I suspect Lady Anwen will be quite pleased with herself when she sees what her matchmaking has wrought. Insufferably smug, I imagine, he agreed with a chuckle, though in this case deservedly so. They descended the stone staircase together, pausing at the great oak doors that led to the courtyard. Beyond them lay the village, the fields, the forests, all part of Dunlor, all beginning to thrive again under their shared care. Ready? He asked, his hand on the iron latch. Maerwynn thought of the journey that had brought her here, from a nameless orphan to a castle maid to this moment, standing beside the man she loved at the threshold of their shared future. Ready, she confirmed. Together they stepped out into the torchlit night, where their people waited to celebrate not just the turning of the year, but the restoration of what had once been lost. From castle maid to lady of the manor, from disgraced lord to rightful heir, their story had transcended the boundaries that society had placed upon them both, and in the process, they had found something rare and precious, a love built not on fairy tales or fleeting passion, but on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet strength that comes from seeing beyond appearances to the true worth within. As Caelin raised the ceremonial torch to light the midwinter fire, the flames leapt high into the night sky, casting golden light on upturned faces. Villagers cheered, children danced, and musicians struck up an ancient tune that spoke of endurance through the darkest days and the promise of light's return. In that moment, watching her people, their people, celebrate renewal and hope, Maerwynn knew with absolute certainty that true nobility had nothing to do with birth or title. It lived in acts of courage, in hands that worked to build rather than destroy, and in hearts brave enough to love despite all the world's obstacles. The circle had closed. The servant had become the lady, not through magical transformation, but through the recognition of the strength she had possessed all along. And the silent guard had reclaimed his voice and his heritage, healing old wounds not with vengeance, but with justice and compassion. Spring would come to Dunlor. The fields would bloom again, and when it did, they would stand together to welcome it, no longer hidden behind masks of station or duty, but as their truest selves. Maerwynn, and Caelin, equal partners in the story they were writing together. In the great tapestry of life, with its threads of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, their tale was but one small pattern. Yet it shone with a particular brightness, a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearance to the truth that lies within, and the extraordinary things that can happen when ordinary people refuse to be bound by the roles assigned to them. The tale of the castle maid and the silent guard would be told for generations in the halls of Dunlor, growing perhaps in the telling, as all good stories do. But at its heart would remain this simple truth, that the greatest transformations come not from magic or miracle, but from the courage to be seen and the wisdom to truly see. As the midwinter fire burned bright against the darkness, Maerwynn slipped her hand into Caelin's, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had come to do. Together they faced the longest night, secure in the knowledge that dawn would come again, and when it did, they would greet it side by side.